Hey, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Deacon Steve, and I'm here to share with you a testimony about my life that I hope that will, do good to some other people out there who can just kind of hear my story and have something to take away from. My story is really about a God's way of letting us know that it's never too late. Um, this testimony is primarily about my father. As a young man growing up in Newport News, Virginia, I had a brother and a sister. We had a father who was present in our home. However, his presence wasn't really felt with respects to being a leader. Um, and a lot of things that happened in our home um, had a negative impact on me. Although he was there, I didn't feel like his presence was it was positive. And as I've said many times, I didn't. I'm not using this testimony to kind of speak down to my father. I just wanted to run and give people a perspective as to how good God's glory is, how good God's mercy is in respects to our parents. Although we all know that parenting is not an easy task, we also know that parents aren't perfect. However, there are certain things as a young man that I look to my father to get. One of the things that I look to my father to get is just how to be a man. Um, in retrospect, a lot of the things that um, that I saw he lacked, um, they really kind of emulated in my life. As an example, my father was a very, 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 very hard worker. He would go to work, um, he would work long hours, um, he would come home, and he would isolate himself within our own home. And mind you, we had a very small house. Actually, it was probably, at the time, we lived in a one bedroom, a family room, a kitchen, and a bathroom, and it was five of us. So you can do the math with respect to how we slept. But like I said, my father was a hard worker, but he was not present in my life. Um, as a young man, I started to enjoy sports. And, as a son, it's cool to, my goal was not only to play sports to have fun and to find an outlet in life, but it was one of the ways I thought I could uh, convince my father to share in some time with me. And I would always ask him, "Hey, Dad, I got a game on Saturday. Can you come?" And just like any kid, my father would say to me, "I don't know, maybe I can make it, maybe not." And I would always be at the games, kind of looking off into the distance, trying to look for my father. And, he never showed up. And so that was disappointing to me. That was just one instance where, he wasn't there for me. Um, Growing up in the projects, I was subject to a lot of, uh, I guess, bad influences. A lot of my friends, they did things like, they were into the drug game, they were drinking early, they was, trying to convince me that was the way to go as far as, messing with girls and having sex. Um, and again, that was another avenue that I felt like my father kind of let me down in the sense that, I didn't learn about sex until I left home, which kind of led to other things in my life that now, looking back, had I had his guidance, I think I would have made different choices. Um, and I'd be remiss without saying that my mother was present, and so she stood in the gap, so to speak, in some of the things that I was doing. However, her her words didn't really ring loud in my ear. My father, a lot of things that my father would say to me rang out in my ear, and he was a man of little words, but when he spoke, a lot of the times I would just be I would listen to those things. One of the things that my father always said to me was to always, protect my brother and sister. I was the middle child. However, I kind of took on the role as the oldest boy, as being the person who kind of, looked out for my younger siblings. And my sister, being she was older, I looked out for her. So throughout my life, as time goes on, my father, again, he was a great provider for me, but he wasn't a good role model. Probably about in my seventh or eighth grade of school, my father got in trouble, and he ended up going to prison. And so we were, at the time, like I said, living in a small home, but that turned into us leaving that house, because it was a house. It was an environment that I felt safe in a sense that, I wasn't worried about looking over my shoulder at night or playing in the yard. But when my father went to prison, that led my mom to kind of step up and be a role model, even more so. And so in doing so, my mom had never really worked, but once my father went to prison, she actively found a job, and she was working at a school cleaning up. And so she really put herself out there by going to work. But at the time, even the house that we were living in, we had to move from that house because she could not afford to continue to pay the rent or mortgage. I don't even know what they were doing, if they were buying or not. I doubt it. But so we ended up moving into the projects, and so that is where a lot of things started to happen in my life that really caused me to resent him. And um, looking back, I realized, even though the situation was, in my opinion, dire, it was something that I took away from that really inspired me to one, to be a better dad, in the sense that I wanted to be available for my kids. But what happened was, when we went into the projects, we just were exposed to more a lot of more things that I wasn't, as a young man, prepared to deal with. Some of the things I felt myself wanting to be a part of a community of young men who were my friends, but I knew the things that they were doing um, weren't the things that my mom was teaching me. But I had a decision to make as far as fitting in. And so I really lived a double life, in the sense that at home, of course, I was following all the rules, doing all the things my mom was telling me. But when I left out of the house, I had to become a different person. I had to be a person, and these are the things that you do as a young kid that you really kind of hindsight look back like, wow, I was doing stupid stuff. So my friends was having me, hey man, take this bag and just give it to a boy, pass it on the bus, or hold it for me until the end of school. They was like, yo, bro, man, take a drink, it ain't but a sip. So they were trying to expose me to a lot of things. And being not really a leader at that time in my life, I was more so a follower, just really trying to fit in. And so I really can understand how some young men get caught up, because when you're in a situation like that, your main goal is survival, right? So I could either listen to what my mom said, then I wouldn't have any friends, I would be ostracized, I would be just, made fun of. So I chose the other. However, they knew I had limitations. When the street lights came on, my mom made it clear by her screaming out my name throughout the neighborhood, hey, come home, Steve, come home. So during this time, like I said, my sister and I, when my father initially went to jail, the word had got out, and then everybody knew that, hey, Steve's dad he was in jail, and a lot of that embarrassment was me having to go to school, my sister and my brother, and deal with the backlash of people making fun of us. So that also put us in another state of mind where we were really depressed kids, but there was no black therapy for us at the time in our life. So as time went on, my mom and I and my sister and brother, we acclimated to living in those circumstances. Although we did not, I didn't totally go to the far side. What it did was it really instilled in me what it is I was going to do with my life after, because it made me think ahead. My father's in prison for something that he did, which was really stupid. He left us out here to fend for ourselves. He hasn't taught me anything. He hasn't been there for me. So I had a lot of anger and hatred and just a lot of disappointment. And so we made it through that. My father he was sentenced to 7 years. He ended up spending 3.5 years in prison. And so my father comes home, I think, in my sophomore, going into my junior year of high school. And so, of course, we were all excited about my father being released from prison. We thought that, he was going to come home. He was going to start, because the thing about it was, when he went to prison, I see my mom, her dedication to him was still shocking to this day, because she was doing, not only was she working, but she was going out selling like dinners, and she was doing all these type of fundraisers, just not for us, but for him. So she was taking that money that she was making on the side, and we were like, Mom, we need some sneakers. She's like, nah, your dad need commissary. We like, but he in prison. What is the commissary? So, we didn't understand that, but she was so dedicated to him and making sure that he was okay that she sacrificed that for us. She sacrificed him in place of us. And, again, hindsight, looking back, that's what she had supposed to do. But all that being said, she continued to support him. And then my father came home. And so, again, I think I was going into my 11th grade year. And so when my father came home, the first couple months, everything was great. He made a lot of promises to us, telling us how things were going to be different. We didn't have a car for the longest time. He was like, well, I'm going to get a car. I'm going to be working and stuff. And so he did what he said he was going to do. He got a job. He got a car. Things started getting better. But I saw my father. I used to hang out at a boys club. And this boys club was, it was a popular boys club. So all the young men in my community hung out there. And they knew me, they knew my father, because my father had a lot of brothers and sisters. And so my father was well known in the community, which I didn't know. They would say, oh, that's your dad? That's your dad? Oh, he's cool. So I kept saying to myself, how does these people know my dad better than I do? And so as time went on, it kind of became obvious to me. I would see my dad like I would come from the boys club and I would pass my dad walking by me. He'd be like, you ain't see me. And I was like, was he joking? Or what does that mean? I didn't see you. And so he was serious. He's like, yeah, you didn't see me. And so this is when, as a young man, I started to figure out what was going on. And so I would go home and my mom would be just kind of pacing the house like, yeah, your dad ain't home. He came home, he changed his clothes and left. And I was like, in my mind, I wanted to tell her that I had just seen him, but I didn't. So I just kind of let that go. And as time progressed, he continued to come home from work, change clothes, and go out. And his excuse was, hey, I just want to hang out. I need some time to myself. And again, my mother was one of those women who didn't argue, she didn't fuss, but she was intuitive. She knew something in her heart wasn't right. And I remember one night, my mom, I was upstairs and I heard her downstairs, and she was in the kitchen sitting at the table, and she had these earrings in her hand. And she was like, this so-and-so got these earrings in his car with a receipt. And she said, she had sent me back upstairs. And I was like, Mom, what's wrong? She was like, yo, your dad wants some earrings and they ain't for me. And I was like, nah, he wouldn't do that. And so my mom was the type of person who did not hold her tongue. And I knew that night there would be a confrontation. And so it was probably about 1 a.m., 2 o'clock in the morning. My dad came home, and my mom literally was like, yo, bro, where have you been? What are you doing? Um, who is these earrings? And my dad was very adamant in saying, I don't know what you're talking about. You know, these earrings, he didn't even answer the question. And before I knew it, my mom was just like, yo, either tell me who these earrings are for, or you have to leave. And then my father, I'm down at the foot of the steps, kind of looking at the conversation. And my father hauled off and smacked my mother. And then she fell, and then he kicked her. And then in that moment, I was froze because I had thought to myself to react, but my father had a very bad temper. And I knew, had I confronted him, I would have I would have really, so I let it go. And the crazy part was the next day, my mom acted as if nothing happened. And I'm looking at her like, what kind of person allows a person to beat her and not do anything about it? So time goes on. My father continues to go out, hang out, go out, hang out. And one night he never came home. And I remember, going downstairs again, my mother sitting at the kitchen table crying. And she's like, well, we're like, Mom, what's going on? Why are you? She's like, I don't know what's going on with your father, yada, 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 yada. And we're like, Mom, listen, we made it without him for 3.5 years. We can make it without him. And my mom was the type of person who was like, don't ever speak bad about your father. And so even through the bad times, she still instilled a certain amount of respect that she thought we should have for him. And so I remember that. But that night he came home, and I said to myself, this ain't gonna happen again. I'm not gonna stand by and let my father, hit my mom or abuse her. And then I had told my brother and sister, I was like, yo guys, we gotta step up. And they were like, bro, you on your own. We know dad ain't, he ain't the person to play with. So I was like, you know what? I'm going out tonight. I'm going to die with my mother, or he gonna die. And so my plan was, I got a hammer, and I said, when he come home and he on some crazy stuff, he getting hit side of the head with his hammer. And sure enough, he came home, and my mom confronted him, was like, where have you been? It's 6 o'clock in the morning. Like, bro, you are so disrespectful. And my father was like, basically, again, this is my house. He started raising his voice. And the level of his voice was so scary to me that I just came downstairs, and I was like, Dad, please leave Mom alone. And then he turned and looked at me like to say, yo, what are you doing? Why are you here? I'm talking to your mom. And I'm like, no, leave her alone. And he walked over to me and he said, so you want to try me? And I didn't say anything, but my nerves, in my mind, I was like, I'm not gonna do anything. But I said, I gotta present an image like I was. And so he hauled off and punched me in the chest. And when he did that, my mom screamed like I've never heard a pitch like that before. And she told him, just leave me alone. And from that moment on, in my mind and heart, he was not my father anymore. I was like, I hate this guy. And so my mom continued to deal with his, infidelities, because that's really what it really was. But she chose to stay. And my sister and my brother, we would constantly say, hey, Mom, listen, we're okay. If you want to leave this dude, leave him. He's not the type of person that I want you to be with. And so she continued to stay with him. I left. When I turned 17, I joined the Air Force. I left, and my father and my mother continued to stay together. But my mother, I would call home, my mother would say, your dad is you know, the unfortunate part of this story is that, there's a good, and I'm going to get to that, but my mom never recovered from him. The love she had for him never faded. It just turned into hatred and anger and resentment and bitterness. And even to this day, I hate the fact that she is, anything I say, anything I do that's outside of the norm, she be like, don't be like your daddy, because your daddy ain't, what. So I was like, I'm like, yeah, mom, you're right, I got that. But so I went off to the military. My mom stayed with him, and then one day my mom called me and said, "Hey, son, listen, I had enough of your dad. I found him. He was with this lady. He was at her house. I went to the lady's house. The lady told me to leave, and he came to the door. And he was like, I'll be home such and such." And so she's like, I had enough. And so I took his clothes out of the house. I threw them all on the lawn, and she lit them on fire. And I was like, oh wow, mom got some heart now. So she doing stuff that we felt like she should have done before. But it was just really an example of her just, to the point of just she couldn't take it anymore. And so he left. Then she was like, I need your help. And as a young person in the military, I didn't have a lot of money, but what I did have, I was sending it home to her to help her get through what it is that she was trying to do. Because at that point, she had stopped working again because he came home and he didn't want her working. So my mom stopped working. He left. Then she found another job and she continued to work. And so time went on. I had a career in the military, and my mother went on to divorce finally, but he left her in a condition where all of the things that he was actually, all of the bills and things that my mom thought was in his name was actually in her name. And so he had really destroyed her credit. And so again, he left her in a situation that was just, it was really hard for her to get past. And for myself, I said, God, I don't know why this man is the way he is. He's my father, but he's just not a good person. And so me as a man growing up in the military, I did everything in my power not to be like him. However, ironically, a lot of my ways I saw were like his. I started to be very early on promiscuous with women. I was, hanging out, doing all the things that, you know, opposite of what I knew was right. Um, and one of the things I forgot to say in this testimony is that throughout this time of my life, my mom kept us in church, and that was the one thing that grounded my spirit in knowing a lot of the things that I used to do. I was convicted in my heart not to, but I did it. But I knew better, and so I believe that really saved me as a man. Um, my mom would always say, "I'm praying for you," and she would always encourage me to go to church. And so I took that on throughout my military career. Like I said, I retired from the military 26 years later. My father, he ended up remarrying, and he was a different person with his new wife, which was so crazy for my sister and brother to experience. He would say, "Hey, when you come home, come and see me." Um, I never really confronted him about why he did the things that he did to my mother. I never really confronted him about going to prison, whether or not he did what he said that he didn't do. We felt as though when he did go to prison that he actually was guilty, but he proclaimed his innocence. And as I started to get older, I realized and I started to think back of the things that he did, and I said, no, he really did it. And so, excuse me, I wanted answers, and I never got the answers from him that I thought that my sister and my brother, deserved. So again, we continued to have just on the surface relationships. He would say, I would come home and visit. And he would say, hey, come and see me. And so one time I decided to go and see him, and he invited me in, and he introduced me to his wife and his house and their stepdaughter, and he was just it appeared to me that he was a loving, caring man. And I was asking myself, like, is this the same person who beat my mother? Right? Is this the same person who went to prison? Is this the same person who was out in the street, who was drinking, who was doing drugs? But now he's apparently changed. And mind you, he never offered an explanation to myself, my sister, my mother, or any of us in regards to an apology. An apology that, hey, guys, I'm sorry for the way I treated your mom and the things that I did that led you to do things that you done. And so, like I said, in the military, I ended up retiring, but I made a lot of mistakes in the military. A lot of mistakes. One of the mistakes I did, as soon as I left home, I said I was promiscuous. I ended up having 2 kids in the same year when I was 19. And one of which I didn't even know I had. And so, that situation later on affected me as a man today, and still does, the relationship that I have with my son, as well as my daughter. And so, it's just a lot of things wrapped up into this story that made me just really sad. But my father, again, he was married, and he continued to be with this lady, his wife. She was a very nice lady. I would tell my mom, hey, Mom, I want to go see Dad. And she'd be like, why would you go see that? Blah, 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 blah. I'm like, Mom, you're right. And a lot of times my mom would just continue to, even though she never wanted us to talk bad about him, she would talk bad about him. She'd be like, the woman ugly. He left her ugly woman for me. I don't know what's wrong with him. So, we kind of laughed about that and stuff. And so, as time moved forward, again, I continued to, I retired from the military. I ended up moving to Maryland. And one day my sister called me and said, hey, man, listen, I think Dad is sick. And I was like, okay, what you want me to do? And she was like, bro, that's your dad. And so, now it's time for reflection. I'm here, I'm in church, I'm trying to get my life on track. I'm married, I have a family, God is speaking to me, telling me, make amends or just have a conversation with your dad. And so my sister says, hey, he's in the hospital. I don't know what's wrong. I can't do this by myself. I need you guys to kind of chip in. And I said to her, okay, cool. I'll come and see him. So I go to see him. And mind you, I have all these answers, all these questions in my mind that doesn't allow me to freely love him like I think I should in this situation. So I go to see him, and he's in the hospital. And the first thing, he was surprised to see me when I walked in. And I guess the thing about forgiving a person is a lot of times the act was there for me. The act of forgiving him was there. Did the pain go away? It hadn't went away. It was still fresh in my heart. Every time I saw my father, him smacking my mother came back to my mind. And so I walked into the hospital room, and he kind of looked over, and he was like, hey, how you doing? And I was like, I'm good, and now I'm thinking, yeah, bro, this is payback. This is karma coming back to you. But again, I never revealed how I was really feeling in my heart about the fact that I was still feeling that resentment towards him. So I went in to see him, and I was like, what's going on? And he was a closed off person as well. Of course, you can't ask doctors exactly what's going on. You could, but I don't think I even had the interest in asking the doctors what was wrong with him. I just thought, he lived by himself. He drank, smoked, drugs, did the gamut his whole life. So I'm like, bro, you 72 years old. This is just old age and your lifestyle catching up to you. But I didn't really think anything was going to happen with regards to his illness. And again, I still didn't know what was wrong. And so that day when I left to see him, my sister and I were talking. I was like, yo, so what's wrong with him? And she was like, bro, he got congestive heart failure. I was like, what? She was like, yeah, he has congestive heart failure, cancer, and some else. And I think he was a diabetic because the skin on his legs and feet were peeling off, like down to the flesh. And I was like, oh, wow, so he's sick. So I told my sister, I said, okay, listen, I'll come back and visit him. We'll take turns. And so my father was released from the hospital. And so at that point, I was like, okay, he good. He back at home. And I don't have to really worry or come back. But I would call him, and again, he would just say things like, I'm fine, I'm okay, nothing's wrong, all is good. So I took that to mean nothing was wrong. So my sister called me one night about 2 o'clock in the morning. She's like, bro, listen, I came to his room, he was in the bed and he was unconscious. And I said, okay. And she was like, so I got him dressed, I called the paramedics, and they came to get him. So, okay, so then I go back again the following, about 2 weekends later, to see what's going on. So when I get there, and it's just funny how life is, he was literally in a room, in the bed, on IVs. I really didn't know what was going on. I kind of looked at the chart. The chart it wasn't clear to me what was actually going on. And so the doctor actually came in at that particular time that I was there, and she said, hey, who are you? And I'm like, I'm his son. And she was like, your father is very sick. And I was like, okay, can you expound on that? And she was like, basically, you and your family need to figure out where you want him to go. And I was like, what do you mean, go where? And she was like, you need to start thinking about when a person is about to die, the hospice. You guys need to think about the hospice care you want to put him in. And I'm looking at her like, okay, are you telling me he's dying? She's like, certainly, he's dying. And then my sister is like, bro, I had no idea. And we're both looking at the doctor like, well, can we speak to his real doctor? Because I think she was a fill-in doctor for the weekend. And so the next day, the doctor came in and he showed me his chart. He was like, hey, Mr. Walker, your father has congestive heart failure. I think his heart is at 20%. I think he has cancer in his lungs. We can't give him chemo. We can't operate because if we do, it's likely he'll pass away on the table. And so, all we can do now is make him comfortable. So my sister and I, this is family, right? We started saying, well, all right, well, I hope you got insurance because your boy, I don't know if I'm going to be sponsoring him. And so my sister was like, let's see how long we can keep him in the hospital. And so we asked the doctors to give us some time to find a place for him. So she moved him into intensive care, and then she was like, I'll give you guys a week if he makes it a week. And so I was like, if he makes it a week, at least, so he's really sick. So they moved him to a room. He's in there, and that week he was in and out of consciousness. And when I went to go see him, I was like, man, you bad off. He was like, man, at some point, it is what it is. And I was like, this is where the aha moment came for me. And I was thinking, this is a man that I got nothing from in life. I loved him because he was my father, but I didn't like him. And so I said, and I don't think I mentioned that throughout the course of his life, he never went to church. He felt like that life was about how you get things in life was just working and hustling and doing the things that you had to do. He didn't have a spiritual background, and his father wasn't present in his life, which really kind of set the tone for what he gave me. And his mother wasn't spiritual, so I later started to reflect that he gave me what he had, right? And so again, I was compelled to do something in that moment because I knew that his life was becoming to the end. And so, I have a cousin who's a pastor, and so um, literally the night before he passed away, I called my cousin. I said, "Yo, cuz, listen, man, I need you to do me a favor." And he's like, "What's up, cuz? I got you." I say, "Listen, man, I need you to go see my father, and I need you to give him the opportunity to uh, take Jesus into his heart before he passes away." So my cousin agreed to do that. And I said, "I need you to FaceTime me because this is important to me, man. I need to know that he has an opportunity to, ask God to forgive him of his sins and to declare Jesus as his Lord and personal Savior." And he's like, "I got you." And so my cousin, he goes to my father, and my father is in and out of consciousness because he's taking morphine and all the type of drugs that they do to make you comfortable prior to your transition. And so the good thing that happened in that moment is that, and I can't even make this up. My cousin, he called my father's name and he said, "Hey man, I want you to give you this opportunity to turn your life over to God and to accept Jesus into your heart." And my father literally opened his eyes and my cousin asked him, would he accept Jesus as his Lord and personal Savior? And my father said, yes. And he smiled and then he lost consciousness. And for me, that's where um, this testimony kind of comes to an end, where even though throughout my life my father was not there for me, he didn't do the things that a father should do. He never expressed or confessed his love for me to me, and nor did I. So I wasn't a man of emotions and communications and stuff. And so just being married and learning to fight my way through those type of situations has been difficult. But through God's guidance and my church family, I've learned to be that type of man. And so again, my father, he did smile. He did say yes, he accepted me. And he actually said the words that he accepted him. And then from that moment, I felt a sense of accomplishment. I felt a sense of relief because I felt that my father, even though he may not have lived the life that I wish he lived, that God, grace and mercy still prevails. It allowed for me to actually give him well, I wouldn't say give him the opportunity, but it afforded him the opportunity to turn his life over to Jesus before he transitioned. And that was a Friday. I came to see my father that following day, which was a Saturday. He was out of consciousness. So my sister and I, we kind of sit around his bedside. A lot of his brothers came to visit him, and I said to my sister, I said, "Well, I'm not going to stay here all night. I'm just going to go and hang out with my cousin. I'll be back tomorrow." And so I left probably maybe an hour and a half. Me and my cousin, we went to a restaurant. We had dinner. We sat around. We were talking, and then my phone rang, and I instantly knew what that call was. Right? It was the nurse calling me to say, "I'm sorry to tell you that your father, he's transitioned, and he's going on. He's no longer here with us." And so, what I want to say in closing is that no matter how long or how bad a person is or what a person does in their life, there's always an opportunity to turn your life over to God, to Christ, and to be in his presence when he dies. And although I didn't get an opportunity to speak to my father and talk to him and get the closure that I would have liked to get, I felt, I thank God that I know I'm going to see him again, and I'll have the opportunity to talk to him. Hopefully, no time soon. But I took pleasure in knowing that my father turned his life over to Christ before he passed away, and I was able to give that, or at least to be a part of helping him do that. And so that's my testimony. I hope that this shares helps someone else who's probably dealing with or struggling with, a situation in their life that a person hurt them or caused hurt and pain to them. I know that the only way I got through this was to put it into God's hands and to allow Him to work through me and to get to come to peace and terms with it. And so I'm happy to say that I forgave my father, I moved past it, and that's it. And so thank you for listening to me, and that's my testimony. Thank you.